Okay, let's unpack this. When you think of ancient Rome, what first comes to mind for you? For many, it's maybe those epic tales of gladiators, vast empires, or maybe even grand emperors. But what's truly compelling and what our sources really highlight is how Rome is so much more than just like a historical footnote. It's really a foundational story that still profoundly influences our modern world. Think about the very structure of our modern legislative bodies, maybe the symbolism in our national emblems, or even the Latin roots embedded in our legal vocabulary, direct, often subtle echoes of Rome. It has this almost mythical influence that endures. So what specific aspect of that enduring influence are we diving into today?
That's a great question to start with because for this deep dive, we're focusing on a truly pivotal period, the rise and, well, the dramatic fall of the Roman Republic. This era, stretching from its legendary beginnings in the 6th century BC all the way to Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, offers just unparalleled lessons in power, governance, and frankly, human nature. What's fascinating here is how these historical events aren't just dates and names, right? They provide a rich tapestry of cause and effect that directly informs our understanding of political systems, societal change, and even individual ambition. We'll explore Rome's unique political structure, its dramatic conflicts, the larger-than-life figures who shaped it, and the internal forces that ultimately led to its transformation. Our source material, it's a comprehensive look at the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and it provides both the broad context and some truly specific, intriguing details that really bring this period to life for us.
Okay, let's start right at the very beginning then, with the immense power of origin stories. Every great civilization has them, but Rome's are particularly potent, aren't they? These aren't just fables. They are these mythical foundations that deeply shaped Roman identity and its core values. Our sources dive into the tale of Aeneas, the Trojan prince, who, after the fall of Troy, journeyed to Italy in his union with the Latin tribe. This wasn't just a simple marriage, but a really profound symbol of the intermingling of cultures and destinies, sort of setting the stage for Rome's future expansion and its unique ability to absorb diverse peoples, integrating them into its growing sphere. But the real heart of Rome's founding myth, the one almost everyone knows, revolves around the miraculous survival of Romulus and Remus. Abandoned at birth, these twin brothers were famously nurtured by a she-wolf, a powerful, almost primal symbol that became synonymous with Rome itself. It spoke to a raw resilience, a kind of untamed yet nurturing strength that Rome saw in itself, especially when facing adversity early on. As the twins grew, they embodied ambition, which ultimately led to conflict. Their story culminates with Romulus founding Rome on Palatine Hill, establishing its initial fortifications, laying down its very first laws, creating the framework for a new society. Our sources highlight, though, that this foundation was tragically born from fratricide, as Romulus killed Remus in a dispute over the city's boundaries. This act, while establishing single leadership, arguably foreshadowed the intense internal conflicts and, well, the civil strife that would plague the Republic for centuries. It highlights an inherent tension between ambition and unity right from Rome's mythical birth.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, as Livy, the prominent Roman historian, profoundly observed, these stories, while undoubtedly embellished and mythical, served a crucial practical purpose in Roman society. They weren't just bedtime tales. They were actively taught and absorbed as essential moral exemplars and political lessons for civic life. Livy understood that even if not entirely factual, these narratives conveyed virtues like pietas duty and devotion versus manliness, courage, excellence, and fides loyalty and trustworthiness. These were principles vital for Rome's identity and its functioning. Think about the strategic abduction of the Sabine women, a pretty controversial act that, surprisingly, led to unity rather than lasting division. Our sources detail how this event, through intermarriage and the eventual granting of citizenship, actually solidified loyalty among diverse groups, effectively transforming potential enemies into integrated members of the Roman state. It was a pragmatic, albeit maybe aggressive, way to rapidly expand their population and foster loyalty. And what's more, this particular incident also brought to light a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of Roman cultural values: the significant role of women as mediators in conflict. The Sabine women themselves intervened between their families and their Roman captors, pleading for peace. This wasn't just a dramatic scene, it underscored a societal appreciation for their ability to foster unity and reconciliation. It demonstrated a nuanced understanding of gender roles that allowed women, particularly in the domestic sphere, to exert considerable moral and social influence, even if they lacked direct political power. This highlighted a cultural emphasis on harmony and integration, even from, well, contentious origins.
So, from these formative myths, we move to a truly pivotal and tragically brutal real-world event that directly triggered the overthrow of the monarchy and the birth of the Republic. the tale of Lucretia. Our sources recount her story as one of profound virtue and honor. She was a Roman noblewoman, known for her purity, fidelity, and adherence to traditional Roman values. But her virtue tragically made her a target for Sextus Tarquinius, the notoriously depraved son of the tyrannical king Tarquin the Proud. He committed a horrific act against her, a violation that sent shockwaves through a society that deeply valued female chastity and male honor. And the aftermath of this horrific act is equally impactful. Lucretia, in her profound personal despair and as an ultimate act of preserving her honor and shaming her tormentor, took her own life after revealing what had happened to her father and husband. Her suicide wasn't just a private tragedy. It became a vivid, potent symbol of collective outrage against the unchecked power, moral decay, and inherent tyranny of the monarchy. It was a catalyst that transformed simmering discontent into outright rebellion, crystallizing the public's desire for a new form of government.
Yeah, and this raises an important question. How could such a deeply personal and horrific act galvanize widespread Republican sentiment against an entrenched, tyrannical monarchy? Our sources explain that it was Lucius Junius Brutus, a key figure in this revolution and actually a relative of the Tarquins, who, upon witnessing Lucretia's body, dramatically retrieved the knife from her wound and publicly proclaimed an oath of vengeance against King Tarquin and his entire family. This was more than just a declaration. It was a powerful, visceral rallying cry that resonated with a populace fed up with oppression and the abuse of power. The swift banishment of the Tarquins that followed was a direct and immediate response, driven by an absolute determination to prevent any single individual from ever again wielding unchecked power. This pivotal moment, the expulsion of the kings and the establishment of two annually elected consuls, initially Brutus himself and Lucius Tarquinius Cotanus, who was Lucretia's husband, marked the true birth of republicanism in Rome, a radical shift towards shared, accountable governance. And to further solidify this profound work from monarchy, Rome immediately implemented an institutional approach to sort of mitigate any lingering monarchical associations. They shrewdly created the religious office of King of Sacrifices, the Rex Sacrorum. This ensured that public sacrifices, a critical religious role traditionally performed by kings, would no longer be linked to any singular figure who might attempt to accumulate excessive secular power. This priesthood was placed under the jurisdiction of the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, effectively emphasizing that even titles previously held by kings shouldn't pose a threat to republican ideals. It cemented the shift towards a shared, accountable form of governance and formally divorced religious authority from absolute political rule. This subtle but really significant move underscored their commitment to a new political identity.
Okay, so with the monarchy overthrown, Rome faced this monumental task of governing itself. And the solution they devised, as our sources reveal, was far more sophisticated and nuanced than many modern constitutions. Here's where it gets truly fascinating. The Roman Constitution differed significantly from our modern understanding of a codified, single written document, neatly organized with articles and amendments like the U.S. Constitution. Instead, it was more an embodiment of evolving societal values, deep-seated customs, and pragmatic political philosophy, perpetuated largely through oral tradition, precedent, and the collective memory of elder citizens. It was a living, breathing framework that grew organically through custom and shared beliefs, reflecting collective Roman values rather than doctrines imposed from above. It was really unique in its design and implementation for its time, adapting and growing over centuries.
Absolutely. And what's truly genius here is Polybius's insightful analysis of the Roman constitution. He observed that Rome effectively combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy into a single, cohesive system, what he famously called a mixed regime. It was a stroke of strategic brilliance that lent Rome incredible adaptability, resilience, and strength for centuries. Unlike the often unstable pure democracies prone to mob rule or rigid aristocracies susceptible to stagnation and corruption, Rome's blend offered dynamic resilience. It managed to channel ambition into productive competition rather than destructive conflict for a remarkable period, a feat few ancient powers achieved. Let's break down those components a bit. First, you had the consuls. These were two annually elected officials who held executive power. They could levy troops, manage finances related to warfare, and lead armies. In many ways, their authority, especially during wartime, appeared almost monarchic, holding the imperium the supreme executive power. Yet crucially, they were subject to senatorial scrutiny, had to agree with each other on major decisions, they had a mutual veto, and, perhaps most importantly, were elected annually and could be prosecuted after their term. This prevented any one person from becoming too powerful or entrenched. Then there was the Senate, representing the aristocratic influence. Composed primarily of patricians, Rome's elite class, senators served for life unless expelled for misconduct. This gave them immense experience, continuity, and an unparalleled institutional memory. They exercised considerable, though largely advisory, influence over legislation, foreign policy, state revenues, and expenditures. Their auctoritas, their moral authority, often dictated military strategies and domestic laws, making them a powerful guiding force in Roman governance, almost like a permanent council of elders. Finally, we had the popular assemblies, the democratic element. These assemblies, like the Comitia Centuriata and Comitia Tributa, allowed citizens, particularly the plebeians or common people, to voice their concerns, vote on legislation, and elect various magistrates. The crucial aspect here were the tribunes of the people, officials elected annually to represent plebeian interests. These tribunes possessed extraordinary veto powers, veto literally meaning I forbid over Senate decisions and even the acts of other magistrates, and their persons were sacrosanct, meaning they couldn't be harmed. This truly reinforced accountability to constituents and ensured that the popular will, or at least a powerful segment of it, had a direct check on the elite, preventing aristocratic overreach.
It's truly incredible how robust this mixed system proved to be, especially during times of immense pressure. Our sources highlight that during external threats, like the existential Punic Wars we'll definitely discuss, the consuls, senators, and popular assemblies actually managed to unite their efforts. This wasn't always easy, given their different interests and class divisions, but it showcased a remarkable synergy and enabled swift, decisive action. Instead of fragmenting under duress, this system transformed potential internal divisions into unified strength, allowing Rome to mobilize vast resources efficiently and execute complex decisions rapidly. The Punic Wars are a perfect example of this collaboration in action, where the military leaders, political strategists, and public support work together, often despite internal disagreements, to face a common enemy. It shows an uncanny ability to put aside differences for the greater good of Rome.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, in peacetime, this intricate interplay acted as a sophisticated system of internal checks and balances that prevented any one component from gaining overwhelming dominance. For instance, if the Senate became overconfident in its authority after a big victory and attempted to assert greater control, it risked provoking resistance from both the consuls, who could veto their decrees, and the popular assemblies, who could pass laws directly or elect magistrates unfavorable to senatorial interest. This dynamic ensured that no single entity became self-sufficient or unchecked in power, fostering a constant negotiation and preventing long-term tyranny. Furthermore, the Romans had another ingenious mechanism for maintaining stability and experience: the cursus honorum, an ascending sequence of public offices. This system, which typically saw individuals progress through stages like quaestor, financial administration, aedile, public works and games, praetor, justice and command of smaller armies, and finally consul, supreme executive power, inherently required prior military service for those aspiring to hold office. This reflected a fundamental belief that military experience conferred both loyalty to the state and practical capability necessary for governance, ensuring a pipeline of seasoned, loyal leaders. Over time, the eligibility for these offices also evolved thanks to persistent plebeian struggles, most notably the secessions of the plebs. These were remarkable events where the common people literally left Rome, withdrawing their labor and military service to protest their lack of rights and demand greater inclusivity. These struggles led to critical reforms, such as granting veto power and sacrosanctity to the tribunes, pushing for greater inclusivity and ensuring a more representative, albeit still class-stratified, government.
Right. Now let's turn our attention to the epic clash that truly forged Rome into a global power, the Punic Wars. Their primary rival in the Mediterranean was Carthage, a formidable foe with starkly contrasting strengths. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, was a dominant maritime power, controlling vital trade routes and possessing a formidable navy, especially with strategically located colonies like Mocha in western Sicily and vast territories in North Africa and Hispania. They were a naval powerhouse, a trading empire. Rome, on the other hand, was a rising land power, eager to expand its influence beyond the Italian peninsula, with its strength rooted in its formidable legions and agricultural base. These two titans, with their differing strategic focuses and spheres of influence, were pretty much bound to collide as their ambitions expanded.
Definitely. And what's fascinating here is how deep the primary causes of tension ran between these two great powers. It wasn't just about land or resources. There was intense political rivalry for dominance over Sicily, a critical trade hub, and a natural flashpoint, given its proximity to both their spheres. Economic competition was fierce, particularly over trade routes and vital resources like the lucrative silver mines in Hispania. And then there were significant cultural differences. Romans prided themselves on their martial values, civic duty, republican ideals, seeing themselves as upholders of order and law. Carthaginian society, meanwhile, revolved around mercantile success, naval superiority, and a different pantheon of gods. Our sources even mention that other Mediterranean powers viewed some Carthaginian cultural practices, like child sacrifices, as morally questionable, contrasting sharply with Roman values and creating a narrative of cultural superiority for Rome. This deep-seated animosity is famously symbolized by Hamilcar Barca compelling his young son Hannibal to swear that oath of undying hatred against Rome, an act that would define Hannibal's life and profoundly shape the next Punic War. The term Punic itself comes from Poeni, the Latin word for Phoenicians, highlighting Carthage's ancient roots and distinct identity.
So the First Punic War, which lasted from 264 to 241 BC, truly marked Rome's transformation. This conflict was sparked by a dispute over control of Sicily and Rome's decision to aid the Mamertines, basically a group of mercenaries who had seized the city of Messana, who were threatened by both Syracuse and Carthage. Initially, Rome lacked any real maritime prowess. They were almost entirely a land-based power and often found themselves severely outnumbered and outmaneuvered in naval engagements. They had to adapt, and quickly, to fight a naval war against the premier sea power of the Mediterranean.
Right, but despite their initial lack of naval experience, Rome demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and a stunning capacity for rapid military innovation. They famously captured a Carthaginian quinquereme, that's a type of warship, and reverse engineered it, building an entire fleet in just a matter of months. Incredible. More importantly, they developed the corvus, a heavy boarding bridge with a grappling hook that allowed them to turn sea battles into land battles, effectively leveraging their legionaries' superior close-quarters combat strengths on the water. This innovation secured them a decisive victory at Mylae, their first major naval triumph, showcasing their adaptability. However, our sources also reveal that while brilliant, the corvus made Roman ships incredibly top-heavy and vulnerable to capsizing in rough seas, leading to significant losses in storms, a pragmatic yet sometimes risky trade-off in their pursuit of victory. It wasn't all smooth sailing for Rome, though. Our sources recount the stunning defeat of Marcus Attilius Regulus, a Roman general, by Xanthippus, a Spartan mercenary hired by Carthage. This highlights Carthaginian strategic ingenuity and their effective use of skilled mercenaries, even when faced with overwhelming Roman forces. Regulus himself, after being captured and sent to Rome on parole to negotiate peace, famously advised the Senate against peace, then returned to Carthage to face torture and death, becoming an enduring Roman exemplar of civic virtue and self-sacrifice. Ultimately, the war's protracted nature led to immense financial strains on both sides. The Treaty of Lutatius, signed in 241 BC, imposed heavy reparations and territorial losses on Carthage, including all of Sicily and an indemnity of 3,200 talents of silver. It severely weakened them and set the stage for Rome's undisputed dominance in the Mediterranean.
Okay, so the Second Punic War is arguably the most famous, largely due to Hannibal Barca's audacious and legendary crossing of the Alps. What stands out about that incredible feat, beyond just a military maneuver, our sources highlight Hannibal's strategic foresight in organizing his diverse troops, using local Gallic guides who were sympathetic to his cause, and expertly managing morale despite the treacherous terrain, the biting cold, and hostile mountain tribes. They describe the immense challenges of navigating deep snow and ice, requiring real ingenuity, like using vinegar to crack large rocks to clear paths for his elephants and massive pack animals. It's a testament to his incredible leadership and indomitable will that he managed to bring so much of his multi-ethnic army, including those war elephants, through such an impossibly difficult journey into Italy, arriving battered but largely intact and ready to fight.
Yeah, Hannibal's aggressive, brilliant tactics, however, contrasted sharply with Rome's evolving strategic responses. A key figure in this period was Fabius Maximus, famously known as the Delayer Cunctator. He adopted a cautious, attritional strategy against Hannibal, avoiding direct pitched battles and instead focusing on harassing his supply lines, wearing down his army, and exploiting Roman strengths in manpower and resources. Our sources provide a wonderful anecdote about his gentle approach to leadership. There was a time when one of his soldiers, having returned from an unauthorized leave, was found to have gone home to bury his brother. Instead of immediate, harsh military discipline, which was common, Fabius recognized the profound human element in the soldier's actions. He provided comfort and understanding, thereby fostering a deep personal allegiance, not through fear, but through respect. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was emblematic of his style. And think about the sheer humility it took for a revered general like Fabius to later willingly serve under the command of his own son in a society obsessed with status that was practically unheard of, and speaks volumes about his character and commitment to Rome above personal pride. But the decisive turning point came with Scipio Africanus, a younger, more aggressive Roman general who dared to take the war directly to Africa itself, threatening Carthage's homeland and forcing Hannibal to return to defend his city. The climax was the decisive Battle of Zama in 22 BC, where Scipio, expertly supported by the Numidian cavalry who had famously abandoned Hannibal, decisively defeated the Carthaginian general in his own territory. This battle not only marked the definitive end of Carthage as a major power, but also secured Rome's uncontested dominance of the Mediterranean. So, what does this all mean? The Second Punic War wasn't just a victory, it profoundly reshaped Rome. It cemented its position as the dominant power, but it also catalyzed significant military restructuring, spurred massive economic expansion from newly conquered territories, and led to fundamental, often destabilizing social shifts within Roman society. Many of which, ironically, would later contribute directly to its internal struggles and the Republic's ultimate decline.
Right, so as Rome soared to new heights of foreign success and accumulated immense wealth, paradoxically, its internal challenges became severely exacerbated. The influx of immense wealth and a massive number of slaves from conquered territories created deep cracks in the Republic's social fabric. Specifically, the traditional system of citizen soldiers who served on campaigns for years often returned home to find their small family farms neglected, lost to debt, or even forcibly absorbed into vast estates known as latifundia, owned by wealthy elites who often used cheap slave labor from conquered territories. This mass displacement led to a burgeoning urban poor, a disenfranchised and angry populace, particularly in Rome itself, and a dangerous power vacuum in the countryside, a powder keg waiting to ignite between the wealthy Optimates, the traditional aristocratic faction who favored senatorial authority, and the reform-minded populares who appealed to the common people.
Yeah, and into this volatile environment stepped the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, two tribunes from a prominent noble family. Our sources detail their bold yet ultimately tragic attempts at sweeping reform. Tiberius Gracchus, as tribune in 133 BC, proposed radical land redistribution to impoverished Romans, aiming to restore the traditional citizen farmer class. He bypassed the Senate entirely, appealing directly to the people despite fierce opposition from the powerful senatorial elite. He even took the unprecedented and dangerous step of impeaching another tribune who attempted to veto his legislation, setting a perilous precedent for undermining established political norms. His younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, followed a similar path a decade later, forming a strategic alliance with the Equites, the Roman middle class of businessmen and financiers, and advocating for even broader reforms, including price controls on grain and, most controversially, extending full Roman citizenship to Rome's Italian allies, a highly contentious issue that challenged the very definition of Roman identity and privilege. Their efforts, though rooted in a desire to restore traditional values of land ownership and citizen participation, ultimately met violent ends. Tiberius was killed by a mob led by Nausicaa, a prominent senator, literally clubbed to death in the Forum, marking the first time in centuries that political disputes in Rome were settled with widespread bloodshed. Really shocking. Gaius, facing similar senatorial opposition and a declared state of emergency, was cornered and killed after a riot. These violent deaths were pivotal moments, tragically illustrating the increasing factionalism and the terrifying rise of political violence as a means to settle disputes in the Republic, a stark departure from the constitutional norms. Our sources also note the remarkable resilience and dignity of their mother, Cornelia, daughter of Scipio Africanus, who bore the deaths of both her sons with stoicism and nobility, often cited as an ideal Roman mother whose character transcended the political turmoil. Their failure underscored that even well-intentioned reforms could not overcome the deep-seated power struggles.
Wow, the turmoil deepened significantly then, with the rise of Marius and Sulla, two colossal figures whose intensely personal rivalry irrevocably transformed Roman politics by injecting raw military power directly into the political arena. Gaius Marius, a novus homo or new man, meaning he was the first in his family to achieve senatorial rank, rising purely through merit, became a celebrated military commander. He crucially appealed directly to the urban and rural poor, implementing military reforms that eliminated property requirements for service and equipped soldiers at public expense. While this created a larger, more professional, and highly effective army, it dangerously shifted soldier loyalty from the state itself to their individual generals who promised them lands and spoils. That set a perilous precedent for the future civil wars. And in stark contrast, you had Lucius Cornelius Sulla, an optimist, a staunch supporter of senatorial supremacy, and a member of the old aristocracy who sought to restore its traditional authority. He viewed Marius's reforms as an existential threat to the Republic's established order.
Exactly. Their bitter conflict escalated dramatically during their respective campaigns against Mithridates VI, a powerful king in Asia Minor. What truly brought their rivalry to a head was Sulla's unprecedented and shocking march on Rome in 88 BC, using his legions to seize the city, an act previously unthinkable and a profound violation of the sacred boundary of the Pomerium. This was Rome's first true civil war. Marius's subsequent violent reprisals, after he briefly regained power, included executing tens of thousands of Sulla's supporters and senatorial opponents, ushering in an era of terrifying brutality and lawlessness. Sulla eventually triumphed, returning to Rome in 82 BC and implementing a system of proscriptions, essentially publicly posted lists of enemies to be executed, allowing anyone to kill those named without legal repercussion, with their property confiscated. This resulted in the brutal killing of tens of thousands more Romans, including many prominent citizens and equidates, fostering extreme fear and distrust amongst citizens, and completely eroding any sense of political security or due process. And here's where it gets really interesting. These events fundamentally transformed Roman institutions. What was once a republic designed with a complex system of checks and balances became increasingly susceptible to individual strongmen who could leverage their personal military power to dictate political outcomes. The loyalty of the armies now lay with their commanders, not with the abstract concept of the republic. This period explicitly set the stage for the future civil wars and the violent breakdown of republican norms that would ultimately bring about the republic's demise and lead to the rise of figures like Caesar. The transition from a system governed by shared principles and the rule of law to one dominated by individual ambition and military might was now well underway, a terrifying precursor to what was to come.
Right. As the Republic continued its turbulent descent, we see the formation of the First Triumvirate, an unofficial but incredibly powerful alliance in 60 BC. It brought together three of Rome's most ambitious and influential figures: Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. This wasn't really an alliance born of shared ideals, but a desperate, calculated attempt to gain political advantage against a stubbornly obstructive Senate, which was often gridlocked by its own internal factionalism and resistance to change. Caesar sought the consulship and a significant military command. Crassus wanted lucrative tax contracts for his business interests and recognition for his financial power. And Pompey, Rome's greatest living general, needed his military treaties ratified and land settled for his loyal veterans. Each brought crucial resources and influence to the table, but their colossal individual ambitions were a volatile mix that basically guaranteed instability.
Absolutely. Our sources highlight the inherent instability of this alliance, fueled by deep-seated personal rivalries and external conflicts that often pulled them in different directions. Crassus's insatiable thirst for military glory, perhaps to match Pompey's renown, drove him to an ill-fated campaign against the Parthians, a powerful Eastern empire. This led to his humiliating defeat and death at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, where his legions were annihilated and he himself was famously killed by having molten gold poured down his throat, a brutal end often attributed to his vast wealth and ambition. This wasn't just a military loss, it was a personal downfall, driven by his vanity, as evidenced by his desire to erect his statue next to Hercules in Rome. The influential Cato the Younger, a Stoic philosopher and unwavering traditionalist, was a staunch vocal opponent of this triumvirate, seeing it as a profound threat to Republican values, moral integrity, and the legitimate authority of the Senate, a clear subversion of proper governance. He constantly railed against their power grabbing. And this raises an important question. What truly dissolved this seemingly unstoppable alliance, leading to inevitable civil war? Well, the death of Crassus in Parthia removed one of the three pillars. But critically, the death of Caesar's beloved daughter, Julia, who was married to Pompey, removed the fragile familial glue holding the two most powerful men, Caesar and Pompey, together. Her death in childbirth in 54 BC meant the personal bond, which had often softened their political and military rivalries, was broken. These events dramatically intensified the inherent rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, pushing them towards an inevitable, violent confrontation for sole supremacy.
So, with the triumvirate fractured and his strongest rivals gone or alienated, Caesar's star began its meteoric ascent. After his consulship, he secured the governorship of Gaul, a position he used to expand Rome's territories dramatically through a series of brilliant and, let's be honest, brutal military campaigns, including 2 expeditions to Britain. These conquests not only augmented Rome's territorial expanse by bringing vast new regions under Roman control, but also solidified Caesar's immense reputation, providing him with incredible wealth, battle-hardened legions, and unswerving loyalty among his soldiers. But this growing, unprecedented power alarmed the Senate, particularly Pompey, who now saw Caesar as a direct threat. The fateful decision by Caesar to cross the Rubicon River in 49 BC, with his army uttering the famous words, Alea iacta est, the die is cast, a direct act of defiance against the Senate's order to disband his legions before entering Italy, was an irreversible move, a clear declaration of civil war against the Republic.
Yeah, and the civil war that followed had profound and devastating consequences for the Republic, tearing it apart. The decisive Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC saw Caesar defeat Pompey, despite being significantly outnumbered, a testament to Caesar's tactical genius and the superior training of his veteran legions. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was brutally assassinated there by agents of the pharaoh, a stark reminder of the cutthroat politics and betrayals of the time. Caesar's victory led to a series of broad reforms as he centralized power, famously declaring himself Dictator Perpetuo, or Dictator for Life, in 44 BC. This was an explicit rejection of the Republican ideal of temporary, accountable magistracies and a clear step towards monarchical rule. He implemented ambitious land redistribution programs for the poor and his veterans, initiated extensive building projects in Rome, and introduced the Julian calendar, a pragmatic reform correcting astronomical inconsistencies, but one which also carried symbolic undertones of a single, powerful figure ordering Roman life. So what does this all mean? Caesar's dual legacy remains hotly debated by historians. Was he a visionary statesman who aimed to stabilize a broken republic through necessary, strong leadership, or a ruthless usurper who destroyed it for personal ambition, paving the way for despotism? It's a huge question.
And the climax of this dramatic period, and indeed the Roman Republic itself, came with the Ides of March, Caesar's assassination on March 15th, 44 BC. The conspirators, a group of around 60 senators, including prominent figures like Marcus Junius Brutus, a direct descendant of the very Brutus who expelled the king centuries earlier, were motivated by profound fears of Caesar's declaration as dictator for life and his perceived aspirations to kingship, which they believed would extinguish the republic entirely. The dramatic moment unfolding at the theater of Pompeii, where the Senate was meeting, at the very foot of Pompey's statue, Caesar's former rival, was filled with chilling symbolic irony. Our sources describe how the conspirators, hiding daggers in their togas, surrounded him and struck him 23 times.
Yeah, and the immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination revealed a public with deeply mixed reactions and fiercely divided loyalties, plunging Rome into further chaos. The conspirators, believing they were heroes restoring liberty and the Republic, ironically failed to garner widespread popular support and instead paved the way for another round of civil wars that ultimately led to the ascension of Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, who would later be known as Augustus. Their desperate act, far from saving the Republic, sealed its fate, clearing the path for the ultimate establishment of the Roman Empire. Figures like Cicero, a staunch defender of the Republic and a brilliant orator, launched impassioned Philippics, a series of powerful speeches against Mark Antony, one of Caesar's generals, vehemently attempting to preserve the old Republican order. However, his intellectual and political efforts ultimately proved futile, leading to his proscription and gruesome death at the hands of Antony's men. His hands, which had penned the Philippics and his head, were famously displayed in the Forum, a chilling testament to the brutal realities of the power struggles that consumed the Republic in its final bloody days.
Wow. So after this incredible, tumultuous journey, how does Rome's story continue to resonate today, especially in modern governance? A fascinating and profound connection lies in the founding of the United States. The American founders had a deep admiration for Roman Republican figures and their virtues, drawing directly on their history as both a guide and, well, a warning. Think of Lucius Quintius Cincinnatus, the ideal citizen soldier who willingly surrendered absolute power after a crisis twice even, to return to his farm. This extraordinary virtue of civic duty over personal gain was deeply admired by George Washington, who famously mirrored this action, stepping down as commander-in-chief after the Revolutionary War and later as president, thereby setting a crucial precedent for civilian control of the military and peaceful transfer of power. Washington even had Cato, a tragedy, a popular play about Republican virtue, and a character who valiantly opposed Caesar, performed for his troops, directly linking their struggle to Roman ideals. Figures like Lucius Junius Brutus were celebrated as symbols of resistance against despotism and tyranny, and Publius Valerius Publicola for establishing popular government and laws that protected the people after the kings were expelled. These Roman ideals heavily influenced the American vision for a new republic, seeking to emulate Roman strengths while avoiding its pitfalls.
That's right. And what's fascinating here is that while the founders undoubtedly drew on Roman ideals like courage, civic duty, wisdom, and the concept of a mixed government for their new nation, they also held a nuanced and often critical view, acknowledging both the ideals and the very harsh realities of Roman politics. Our sources reveal critiques from figures like John Adams, who, despite his admiration for Roman civic structure, famously called Roman patricians griping usurers and tyrannical creditors, reflecting a deep skepticism about the Roman elite's economic inequalities and self-serving nature. Thomas Jefferson, too, believed the Roman government was often steeped in corruption and frequently lacked true virtue, pointing to its decline as a cautionary tale of what happens when power becomes concentrated and unchecked. The core distinction, the crucial lesson America ultimately embraced, was the principle that all men are created equal with inalienable rights. This was a stark contrast to Rome's often exclusive citizenship, which was based heavily on class, status, or even military service, and certainly did not extend to all people. For modern democracies, the Roman experience highlights the critical importance of preventing any single component or individual from gaining overwhelming power. The founders meticulously studied Rome's internal failures, the social upheavals caused by the Gracchi, the brutal civil wars instigated by Marius and Sulla, and ultimately Caesar's rise to absolute power to design a system with robust checks and balances, a bicameral legislature, House and Senate, and a clear separation of powers, precisely as a safeguard against the tyranny they saw consume the Roman Republic. It's a constant tension, isn't it? The delicate balance between the need for strong leadership and the preservation of liberty for all citizens, a lesson Rome taught the world through its very collapse.
We've traversed an incredible historical landscape today, exploring the Roman Republic's mythic rise from humble origins, its military triumphs that forged a Mediterranean superpower, the genius of its balanced, adaptive constitution, its profound internal struggles exacerbated by success, and its ultimate dramatic transformation into an empire. Understanding this history isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about grappling with universal themes of power, leadership, human nature, and societal change that are just as relevant now as they were 2 millennia ago. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Roman Republic's legacy serves as a profound historical laboratory, allowing us to analyze political systems, human ambition, and societal resilience in a way that few other civilizations can. It's kind of a mirror reflecting our own challenges.
It really is, and this raises an important question for you, the listener, to ponder. If Rome's complex, carefully balanced constitution, designed precisely to prevent tyranny and internal strife, ultimately succumbed to those very forces, the ambitions of powerful individuals and irreconcilable class divisions, what does that tell you about the ongoing inherent challenges of maintaining a free and stable self-governing society in any era? Perhaps it encourages us to constantly consider the ongoing tension between individual ambition and the collective welfare, and how societies must vigilantly navigate those fundamental shifts in power, values, and social structures. It's a question that continues to echo through the ages, urging us to remain engaged and vigilant in our own times.